Gathering Storm and the Dumbest Bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today is Garrick Ross. How you doing, Garrick?
Oh, it's great. How are we doing today?
Absolutely great. And of course, Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and Adam Couture, our producer. We have just Garrick and I, so it's Mark and the Millennial. And the podcast is called A Gathering Storm and, of course, the Dumbest Bill in America. And so first up, we have the attack of the My Pillow guy. And so many of you in podcast land have heard bits and parts of this.
It's all over Twitter and the news.
It is, but this is really fascinating to me because the My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell, he's the guy that has the commercials all over TV, primarily Fox, let's face it, but I'm sure other commercials as well. On other channels and networks. And he's always advertising the pillow that he came up with. And then he has extensions, My Pillow Topper and God knows what else. And he sells these basically online and through call-in, of course, because people see his commercial. I'm like, oh, I need a pillow. And he, of course, runs his own commercials. So it's always him. And so he goes at the White House with Donald Trump, the President of the United States. Mike Lindell does, the My Pillow guy. And he basically has a quick speech about what he's doing to help with this effort to fight the coronavirus epidemic and pandemic. And first, we're going to hear what he said at the White House. And here is a clip from Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy.
God gave us grace on November 8, 2016 to change the course we were on. God had been taken out of our schools and lives. A nation had turned its back on God. And I encourage you to use this time at home to get back in the Word, read our Bibles, and spend time with our families. Our president gave us so much hope where just a few short months ago, we had the best economy, the lowest unemployment, and wages going up. It was amazing. With our great president, vice president, and this administration, and all the great people in this country praying daily, we will get through this and get back to a place that's stronger and safer than ever.
So there you have it. So obviously, the My Pillow guy is a fundamentalist Christian. And there are a variety of reasons that I know that he has found Christianity, and that's in part because he had, I believe, a drug addiction.
Yeah, he was a meth addict for a while.
He was a meth addict.
Yes.
And then decided he became a fundamentalist Christian and then developed this company and then decided to make pillows in the United States. He clearly could have made them anywhere and could have done so much cheaper outside the country, but he chose to put America first with his company and with his life. And so that was him talking at the White House. No sooner did that happen than people were tweeting at the White House, and by people I mean the mainstream media, attacking him. This is a guy that is trying to make masks for this effort to fight this pandemic, and they're attacking him because he said the word God, and he brought religion into his discussion. And so we have Chris Hayes from MSNBC who attacked Mike Lindell and even called him, instead of My Pillow Man, he called him Mr. Pillow, which is actually kind of funny. But in any event, here is Chris Hayes from MSNBC attacking My Pillow.
Lie, and you can catch him in those lies and hold him accountable, but that doesn't make for an effective public health response.
Yeah, that's why he's bragging about the ratings. It's obviously above my pay grade. I don't make the call that we take them or not, but it seems crazy to me that everyone's still taking them when you got the My Pillow guy getting up there talking about reading the Bible.
Yes, so there you have it. Because MSNBC, naturally, Chris Hayes, he's just so cool. How dare you read the Bible at this particular point in time when the United States is under attack by what is really an invisible enemy? And it's killing people, this invisible enemy. And you have this gentleman, Mike Lindell, who's an American hero, who's stepping up along with his employees to make face masks, among other things, to protect first responders. And he's one of the many, many hundreds, if not thousands of individuals in the manufacturing sector who are stepping up to do this kind of thing. What do you think, Millennial?
I think two things can be true here. I think one, we can all agree that is a little weird to listen to. He is not the most easy speaker, and it's a little cringy.
Mike
Lindell,
okay.
Going up there and giving a Bible thumping sermon on the podium. But I think that all of that should, I wouldn't say be ignored, but you should take that into the context of why is he up there? And he was invited up there because He's doing this great thing for Americans. He is answering the call that so many others have answered, that, you know, we're in a real crisis right now and it's all hands on deck. And rather than making pillows to help other, you know, to sell for his business, he's making masks. And masks are what we need desperately in healthcare fields. Masks are what the elderly population needs when they run their basic errands.
Oh, yeah.
Masks is just, it seems like the guidance has shifted and everybody needs masks, and people like Mike are going to be how we get them. And I think it's unfortunate, you know, somebody like Chris Hayes, who probably covets himself as some great intellectual, is getting up there and bashing him for political points because he can. And
because he supports the president.
He supports
of the
the president,
States.
and he's his best friend.
So
and,
therefore,
you know,
Mike
he's a big
Lindell's a
donor.
bad guy because he supports the president, because the mainstream media, MSNBC and CNN in particular, they don't think that you're a great American if you're trying to protect Americans and basically remanufacturing, completely changing your company to remanufacture something completely different than what you were making before. I mean, obviously, he's going to have to pretty much stop making pillows.
Well, they would
potentially.
Well, you know how they would want that done is they would want, you know, the president to invoke the Defense Production Act and then nationalize a bunch of corporations and have them run by the state to produce what they want. And, you know, Trump is relying on the free market, who I think for the most part is done a good job. It's just demand is so high right now. And regardless of if we even invoked nationalization, I don't think it would be so easy for us to meet a lot of these quotas. But, you know, Chris Hayes has those kind of an agenda.
Sure.
And so he's going to use this time to bash Mike Lindell to talk about it.
Yeah, demand is high and we've exported jobs to China. But do you think MSNBC and CNN would be talking about that? Oh, no, of course not. Well, here is Mike Lindell's response. And here's the clip.
And I heard Jim Acosta, he was sitting 10 feet from me in the Rose Garden. And I looked over him and I'm just going, you know, I go, what kind of person are you? And then I find out he said this about me, terrible thing about me today. And like I'm promoting my company. Everybody knows who my pillow is. My employees they're working diligently. They're working hard right now, making masks to help people. I want to get this country back just like the president does.
Yeah, he just wants to get the country back. He's a patriotic American, and he's the bad guy. And of course, meanwhile, you have MSNBC and the Coronavirus News Network, otherwise known as CNN, basically, you know, going up against him. So, you know,
it's just Jim Acosta, Mark. I mean, we can end if we wanted to, we could just end the conversation right there and be like, oh, Jim Acosta.
It's Jim
What else
Acosta.
do you need to say, really? I mean,
True.
get you somebody who loves you the way Jim Acosta loves himself. And every time he gets up there on a briefing and starts lecturing the president, he's not really being a reporter anymore like he so claims he is.
It's true. And it seems like much of the left, certainly not all, okay, but much of the left, the progressive left, they kind of want to use this opportunity, this national disaster, if you will, of a pandemic, as an opportunity to criticize the president and bring him down. Obviously, it's an election year, but you're really not supposed to do that during times of national emergency. And so we have a clip with Trump, President Trump. He's calling out the Washington State Governor Inslee, who was a former candidate for president on the Democrat side.
Very early, in case you forgot. And
Very
if you
early
really
in,
remember who Governor Inslee is, he's the guy who kind of looks like a white-haired G.I. Joe.
Yes, he does. And he was in early and he got out really early.
Very
'cause
early,
No
yep.
one cared who he was or knew where he was.
And getting up there and screaming bloody hell about climate change isn't exactly a recipe for success.
Yeah, exactly. So good old Governor Inslee, Trump calls him a nasty person. And because naturally the press is pushing him on why aren't you talking directly to certain governors? Obviously, Trump is talking directly to Cuomo and to many other, and obviously Gavin Newsom. He's talking to the California governor and the New York governor and many others. But this particular governor, Trump has delegated to Vice President Mike Pence to speak with because Inslee is just an ideologue, okay? And if you see how he's governed, and you see how many dumbest bills we have coming out of that state, you can understand why. Here's the clip. You'll love it. Here it is.
You have to put that in. And it's said in there, FEMA, and it's said in their Army Corps of Engineers, because when they disrespect me, they're disrespecting our government. And you know what? I don't mind if I'm disrespected, but they can't disrespect the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA. Okay.
Why is the lack of
Please go ahead.
something that's important in the midst
I want them to appreciate the incredible job we're doing. We are doing a job the likes of which has never been done before. And there are a couple of people that know that. But for political reasons, let's say they're Democrats. They don't want to give this administration credit, and that's okay. But I don't have to deal with them. But our vice president does deal with them. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr.
But that's
President.
why CNN is not trusted anymore. They are not trusted. They are fake news. Remember that. Go ahead. Yes, you are.
So that's the Coronavirus News Network. Basically, Jim Acosta arguing with the President of the United States, arguing, right? Is the press's proper role to argue with a president?
Oh, God, no.
It's not.
No.
The proper role is to report what the president is saying, ask questions, question what the president of the United States is saying, and be critical in your commentary. That's fine. But you're not supposed to debate the president of the United States.
Yeah, you go to the press briefing, you ask your questions, and then you take those responses and you give them to the Chris Cuomos and the Don Lemons and everybody else on the network who does the social commentary. And the same goes for Republicans at Fox News and all of the Wall Street Journal and everything. You just ask questions. You don't get combative. It's just not journalism.
And it doesn't really wear well on CNN and MSNBC anyway, because you can just see that people who really have understood traditional journalism and critical thinking type journalism and investigative journalism look at this and they realize it's nonsense. I mean, this is not. You have the President of the United States. He's asked the question by Jim Acosta, why aren't you talking to Governor Inslee directly? Aren't you supposed to? And the president's like, of course we're talking to him. It's just not me talking to him, because the governor of Washington State is all about playing gotcha. He's really not interested in solving a problem.
It's also why you have a cabinet and you have delegation of responsibility.
Exactly.
Because if the president spent every minute of every day on the phone with all 50 governors plus territories and commonwealths, I mean, he'd be a pretty busy guy, and I don't know that he'd have time to do all the rest of the other things. But hey, I will say, I can't say this is a shocker coming from CNN or any of these news networks, because it seems like these kind of quibbles with the president are at least an everyday thing.
Every day.
And honestly, I know we're talking about it, but I don't think many people at home particularly, they're tired of it.
Well, here's an
idea.
Why doesn't CNN and MSNBC go talk to the governor of Washington State and ask him about how he's managing his state and being critical and using investigative resources and journalism to find out how well things are going there? They're not interested. They're not interested. They could care less.
And I think one thing that we should talk about is, why do we have this kind of a discourse? And I think it's because we're lucky enough that we live in a federalist type of country where, and an open and free society where people can have discourse and they can talk and they can dissent and they can argue and it's fine. I mean, look at China right now. Do you think if the governor of whatever province in China came out and started yelling at Xi saying he didn't have the best stuff right now,
He'd disappear.
He would disappear in a heartbeat. And so I think some people should be pretty appreciative of the discourse that we can have in this country.
And an urn would be delivered to his family very quickly with his ashes in it. It's like, oops, sorry. He succumbed to coronavirus. We're so sorry about that. So you know how we talked about the Michigan governor, Governor Whitmer.
She's another one complaining all the time.
She's always complaining. So she actually signed an executive order in the state of Michigan saying that hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine could not be used in the state of Michigan, in spite of all of the evidence to the contrary that it might be helpful. I didn't say is, but very much might be helpful. And even if and by the way, it's already out there, this particular drug, and it's already been used for other things like lupus and other kinds of issues. Well, she just completely reversed her previous executive order and said, okay, well, now we're going to use it because she had so much pushback from her own people in her own state. And the reason why she did it initially is because she thought it was going to be a win for the president, without question, that he's actually willing to try anything, to be pragmatic, to do what works. So she finally reversed course on this. Well, so that's good news for the people of Michigan, but also the people of Michigan need to make sure they unelect her, because she's obviously also an ideologue and not the least bit interested in solving problems.
We're at war here in a metaphorical sense. We're at war with a disease, and while it may not be conventional and we can't see our enemy, it is out there, and you got to fight with the resources and the tools you got.
Yes.
You can't hand your soldiers a gun, but unload it before you hand it to them, and that's what you're doing when you take these kind of stands, because you think it'll score you some kind of political points, or that you're going to supersede CDC guidance or anything like that.
Exactly, and you know what, Garrick, we're talking about this podcast. This podcast is entitled "A Gathering Storm." And a gathering storm is happening not just here in the United States for obvious reasons because of the pandemic. It's happening globally. We have global economy. The global economy is crashing. We have people dying. We have all these different medical companies trying to race to a cure for the people of the United States and also for the people of the world. And meanwhile, we have the media, the mainstream media, and we have the ideologues and the progressives trying to bring down this country because they hate the president. And it's interesting. The rest of this podcast, we're really going to talk about this incredible gathering storm that's occurring across the planet. And it's really interesting because if you care about international affairs, you need to start paying attention to not just what's happening with this pandemic, but what's happening to our enemies and what our enemies are up to. And first foremost, in April of 2015, Bill Gates talks and predicts that the next outbreak after Ebola, we're not really ready for. He said this in April 2015. And just so you know, Bill Gates is the World Health Organization's second biggest donor after the United States. It's impressive, okay? Because the purpose of the WHO is really to have countries coordinate, especially with issues in pandemic. You're much better off talking than not talking, even though the WHO is completely corrupt, and I agree. Nonetheless, during a TED Talk in 2015, Bill Gates warned that the biggest threat to civilization wasn't nuclear war, but a viral outbreak. And he goes into detail about how we've invested a ton of money into nuclear deterrence, but very little towards preparing for the next epidemic. And certainly he was looking way ahead. And here's the first of two clips. Here it is.
It didn't get into many urban areas, and that was just luck. If it had gotten into a lot more urban areas, the case numbers would have been much larger. So next time we might not be so lucky. You can have a virus where people feel well enough while they're infectious that they get on a plane or they go to a market. The source of the virus could be a natural epidemic like Ebola, or it could be bioterrorism. And so there are things that would literally make things 1,000 times worse.
So there you have. That was Bill Gates in 2015 talking about a virus that could be spread very quickly globally, and people didn't even know they had it, just like coronavirus. And he not only was he talking about this in 2015, but he's saying that we should be prepared for this. And he was doing so after the Ebola virus and crisis had finally succumbed and gone away. So we have a second clip, and here's the second clip with Bill Gates. Here it is.
There's no need to panic. We don't have to hoard cans of spaghetti or go down into the basement. But we need to get going because time is not on our side. In fact, if there's one positive thing that can come out of the Ebola epidemic, it's that it can serve as an early warning, a wake-up call to get ready. If we start now, we can be ready for the next epidemic. Thank you.
So there you have it. Bill Gates saying back in 2015 how we should start now to prepare, understanding that these epidemics and these pandemics are coming from usually third world countries or countries with awful hygiene. And Africa, and of course China, and many other parts of Asia, and so forth. But nonetheless, that's happening. Just any thoughts on this, on his prescient speech there?
Yeah, and I thought you touched on it nicely, where you said, we spend a lot of time focusing on tangible attacks like nuclear destruction or conventional war, and we do a lot to prepare for these. But something so simple as preparing for this virus would have just been buying more masks or buying more ventilators or hand sanitizer, and just having a lot of these things on standby in a national stockpile. I mean, it's not like we had to go and build a bunch of, XM nuclear warheads here. These things aren't terribly expensive, and I think we're 5 years too late. But I think going forward, like you said, it's a gathering storm. I think there will be a reckoning where we're a lot more prepared for things like this by taking the natural precautions that people like Gates are advocating.
What I was wondering, because your generation is going to be super affected by this, because this is not going anyway anytime soon.
This is a historical event.
It's going
the
to
world
probably
will be
happen
very
again.
different after this is over than before.
And here's my thought: these N95 masks. What does it cost for a case of them? Like let's just say a case has 100 of them, right?
It can't be that expensive.
And let's just say that we were told by, first of all, Bill Gates did warn us, but let's just say our government said, look, the government doesn't plan anytime soon on stocking enough of all of these supplies that we need. But you know what? We recommend that you supply.
How much does it cost me to go and buy them?
Yes. What does it cost? Not a ventilator. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just the masks, potentially some other protective equipment. And just to have that in a box in your basement and just sitting there just in case. And you know what? the government should have done that because in America, we believe in individual choices and freedom, and we believe in individual personal responsibility. And I would have totally done that. So would my wife, so would my entire family. If they told us that this was a possibility, we said, okay, we're not going to depend on the government in their national stockpile nonsense. We're going to do it ourselves because we shouldn't be this is America. We don't trust government to solve problems. We trust people.
I think it also wouldn't be unrealistic that going forward, whether legislatively or hospital conglomerates take their own initiative, that you're going to see them have some kind of plan put into place and verbalized saying that we're going to have X number of days or X number of weeks or months worth of supplies in storage that in the event we need them, we can use them for an event like this.
Yes.
And I think that'd be another good way to, whether legislatively or private sector or the hospitals taking on their own initiative, there should be some kind of plan going forward.
Agreed.
Where these things are taken care of.
And our national stockpile, clearly there is a national stockpile. Clearly there was planning involved, right? But here's the problem. It's all centralized in the location of the national stockpile, when in fact, where it really needs to be is the places where it needs to be, at hospitals, at people's homes. I mean, when you go into the grocery store, I'm sorry, it makes perfect sense to wear one of these masks to make sure that you're protecting yourself and protecting other people from yourself.
And gloves.
Absolutely. And if they told us, we would have bought it. You know what? So would have most Americans would have bought them.
And we might be in a lot different place in terms of the spread and the rate of growth that we're experiencing now than if we'd have known these things.
And by the way, that's both parties, both Republicans and Democrats.
Historically, over
not telling
2 or
the
3
people.
administrations, not
telling us that we should be prepared. And instead saying, oh, don't worry, we're going to be paternalistic and we're going to make sure that we prepare for you. Nonsense.
And I'm not saying that we should be doomsday preppers here and we should have months and months worth of supplies, but I think it should be reasonable that some of us should take precautions, like we have a first aid kit in our house, that we have a box of masks, we have a box of gloves, because it can't take up that much space, but in the event you need it, you're really going to need it.
Maybe 3 months worth of supplies, because this could be lasting at least 3 months. At least that's what we're being told. So next up, Japanese Deputy Prime Minister says that the World Health Organization should be renamed the CHO, or the China Health Organization. Obviously, the WHO is very corrupted by China, as are many other international organizations. And that there's a natural competitiveness between Japan and China, always has been. Difference is that the Japanese, generally speaking, play on a level playing field. The Chinese do not. And the Japanese have had it because obviously, geographically, everything that happens in China and North Korea impacts Japan. So we have a clip on this. It's about a minute long. It's worth listening to because this is the Japanese media saying this, which is pretty gutsy when you have a neighbor so large like China nearby. And here's the clip. It's worth listening to.
Speaking to Japanese lawmakers, the Deputy Prime Minister said the WHO should change its name to the CHO, or China Health Organization. He said being excluded from the global health body, Taiwan was driven to become a world leader in combating the coronavirus.
I think the World Health Organization should change its name. It shouldn't be called the WHO. It should be renamed the CHO. This appeal is truly resonating with the people.
The Japan official took issue with former WHO Director General Margaret Chan, charging her with inadequate accountability. He said the current Director General was no better for giving in to China's spin about the coronavirus.
Early on, if the WHO had not insisted to the world that China had no pneumonia epidemic, then everybody would have taken precautions. The WHO, which is a global organization, does not even include Taiwan. And then precisely because Taiwan is not a member of the WHO, it becomes a world leader in fighting the epidemic. Then, after that statement is made, the CCP jumps out to correct it. It says Taiwan is a region, not a country.
So yeah, there you have good old China saying, no, Taiwan really is not an independent country, and that's really obviously what they want to say is it's part of China. And this is part of the gathering storm in Asia, and the issue is China, without question. And a lot of people say, oh, no, it's North Korea, folks. No. North Korea is nothing more than a satellite state of China. They do what China tells them to do. That's a fact.
And they're lucky they got their hands on a nuclear device, so they get some respect from that region. But me and Ryan, we talked about this, I think, 2 weeks ago when we were talking about hegemonic, representation. Yeah, me and the squirrel when we were talking about this. And China is the equivalent of the United States in the Asian region. So here, we have Canada and Mexico, and neither of them are substantial threats to our power in the region. Over there in China,
we have Western values.
We have Western values, and that's the key thing right there. So we get along with our neighbors. But over there in the Asian Pacific region, you have Japan, who was, the Empire of Japan during the 1940s was a huge deal, and they've taken some steps down as a result of our defeating them in World War II. But China has since begun building its place up in the international world. And
it's an economic power. There's
it's
no
an
doubt
economic
about it.
power, and you're starting.
And
to
we've
see,
let that happen.
Yep, we let that happen under our watch, and you're starting to see a lot of the consequences of that. A country like Taiwan is being effectively annexed via political negotiations.
And they're being threatened.
On a World Health Organization just talking about them basically effectively delegitimizes a country because China said so.
Taiwan is threatened. Japan is threatened. Obviously, Hong Kong is now part of China, but they're allowed to kind of have their own kind of economy that's not under the communist dictatorship. Of course, we all know that it still is. And of course, all countries in Asia are basically threatened by China without question. In fact, Bloomberg just reported that China concealed the extent of the virus outbreak. U.S. intelligence is saying this, and they said so to Bloomberg under the understanding that they would not reveal the sources of the U.S. intelligence community. China has concealed the extent of the coronavirus outbreak in the country, underreporting both the total cases and deaths suffered from the disease. The U.S. intelligence community concluded in a classified report to the White House, according to 3 U.S. officials. This is not a surprise, of course. We've been talking about this for weeks now. The difference is now the U.S. intelligence agencies, as you would expect, who are looking at satellite images and basically surveilling what's happening in China, now that the truth's starting to come out, and now it's being verified by satellite photography.
There was no reason to ever take China at their word.
Oh my gosh.
And I can't believe that a lot of places covered for them and gave them the benefit of the doubt where they'd never earned it.
And so look, we're building up to this because the podcast is called A Gathering Storm, and President Trump had a press conference, and this is the most recent press conference with Secretary of Defense Mike Esper, and much of the country's top brass. And this is interesting because when all of those gentlemen walked behind the President of the United States during this press conference, I thought to myself, well, this is interesting. Images mean a lot, right?
Yes.
Visuals mean a lot. So the visual here is America is strong, we are united, and so forth. And I thought that was the case, and it is the case, but more is happening. And I learned this, and you should learn this and understand this. This is important during this press conference because Iran has been planning on a sneak attack. The Mexican cartels have been amping up shipments of illegal drugs to the U.S. And in addition to that, the Mexican cartels cooperate with the Chinese government and the Chinese cartels, which ship fentanyl to the United States. And there's a lot going on that is quite interesting because when other rivals believe that your country is under siege and your country is weakened, they probe to find out how weak it is.
They want to see the relative power that they have compared to you. And
they do.
Since we're down a little bit right now, they want to know if they're in striking distance or if they can continue to leverage and weaken us more.
So this storm is no doubt gathering. We have a clip from the press conference. Listen to this very carefully because this is not about drugs, guys, even though that's what the president's talking about. It's not just about Iran. It's about China. And here's the clip.
To achieve a total victory, as governments and nations focus on the coronavirus, there's a growing threat that cartels, criminals, terrorists, and other malign actors will try to exploit the situation for their own gain. And we must not let that happen. We will never let that happen. Today, the United States is launching enhanced counter-narcotics operations in the Western Hemisphere to protect the American people from the deadly scourge of illegal narcotics. We must not let the drug cartels exploit the pandemic to threaten American lives. In cooperation with the 22 partner nations,
U.S. Southern Command will increase surveillance, disruption, and seizures of drug shipments and provide additional support for eradication efforts, which are going on right now at a record pace. We're deploying additional Navy destroyers, combat ships, aircraft and helicopters, Coast Guard cutters, and Air Force surveillance aircraft, doubling our capabilities in the region. Very importantly, our forces are fully equipped with personnel, protective equipment, and we've taken additional safety measures to ensure our troops remain healthy.
So there you have it. So the United States of America is deploying the entire resources, not all resources, but much resources right off of our coast. And we're doing so under the auspices of, well, the cartels are trying to bring in drugs. I think that that's probably true, but there's a lot more going on there, a lot more. And what am I inferring here? I'm inferring that I have no doubt that the Chinese Communist Party is cooperating with Iran, of course, which is trying to create issues in the Middle East, while at the same time cooperating with the Mexican drug cartels, who are trying to not just ship drugs into the United States while people are home and bored, maybe depressed because they've lost their jobs, but more than that, maybe trying to import other things, maybe other biological weapons, quite frankly. And we don't know because we don't know what we're not being told. But here's the thing. There's a lot going on, and I think that the American people, and please podcast listeners, listen very closely and read a great deal now that you're home. This is a great opportunity to find out what's really happening in our world, because the United States of America is being challenged, and we're being challenged directly by our enemies, and enemy number one is China. Thoughts on this, Garrick?
Yeah, so I as somebody who is very into a lot of the political theories associated with foreign relations, ones that I'm a particular fan of, and I'm talking about this so you all have something to read about at home and can look into in the context of what we're talking about, and it's called structural realism. It's made famous by two political philosophers named John Mearsheimer and Kenneth Waltz. And basically what they talk about is, in this context, the structure of foreign relations is such that the United States is the penultimate power in the world, and China is closely on our heels.
They wanted to dethrone us,
and
obviously.
they wanted to dethrone us, and using a lot of the international circumstances that we're experiencing now, you know, coronavirus as a global event, they're going to use this as well as their proxies in our region and in the Middle East, in places where we have a very big projection. And what they're going to do is, like what Mark is saying, use their influence to kind of get in behind us and cause damage and further weaken us in a time where we're already kind of down.
Yes, and here's what's interesting. To add to that, great point, naval aircraft carrier is under coronavirus attack.
The Theodore Roosevelt, which is probably, I think, our flagship in I believe it's the Pacific Fleet.
So the commander of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier where an outbreak of the coronavirus has spread to at least 70 sailors, and growing, by the way, has warned Navy leadership that decisive action is required to save the lives of the ship's crew. We are not at war, but we do not want sailors to die needlessly. If we act now, says the commander, we are failing to properly, we need to act now because we're failing to properly take care of our most trusted asset, our sailors, Captain Brett Crozier wrote in a memo to the Navy's Pacific Fleet. So 3 U.S. defense officials have confirmed this to CNN. The spread of the disease is ongoing and accelerated, he added. So look, think about what we're telling you. All right, the President of the United States stands with the brass, the top brass of the United States of America, talking about Iran, talking about the Mexican cartels and how they're cooperating with China, but he doesn't call out China by name. And now we have the American military on our most important ships that are being poisoned by this virus outbreak.
Now there is some good news there. They say that generally the overall health of the sailors is fine, and given that a lot of them are younger, they're healthy, they don't have pre-existing conditions, and that most of them are asymptomatic, and we shouldn't worry that the Teddy Roosevelt's flying blind out there in the Pacific, but it is still something that distracts our military. It takes their watch off of the events going on in the world, and they have to focus on domestic issues and right that ship. And it allows China to continue to move untethered and without having to deal with a lot of the same issues that we are dealing with.
Sure, and look, and the Gateway Pundit, and the Gateway Pundit, this is kind of one of those news sources that often has stories that lead the media by a day or two. Most of the time, to be frank, they're accurate, but naturally sometimes they're not, of course. And I'm going to read from the Gateway Pundit, and I'll let the listeners decide. The Gateway Pundit has in its paper today, with its economy collapsing in an act of economic war, China dropped the coronavirus and destroyed the entire world economy. And its point is that China did this intentionally because the communist, by China, I'm talking about the communist government. The communist government, the economy was not growing fast enough in China under President Trump because he was bringing industries back to the United States. And their theory is that the Chinese did this intentionally to be able to sink the world economy because that way it would weaken the United States relative to China. And that is what they really want to see. Kind of interesting. I just want to say that this is a story that's out there. But look, a lot of signs are there because the president's talking about all of these countries and all of these folks who are enemies who are basically there's a war going on, basically. There's a Cold War that's happening. There's a gathering storm. And it reminds me of the 2002 film, The Gathering Storm, which of course is based on Churchill's autobiography. And Churchill's wife, Clementine, complains, and you guys will appreciate this. Churchill, in the 2002 film, his wife, Clementine, complains to Churchill, why did you buy this house? The house is called Chartwell. Of course, only in England do they name houses. But why did you buy this house and move us to the English countryside, kind of in the middle of nowhere? And so then he takes her out on the balcony and he says, you see that? That's the English countryside. Of course, the English countryside is absolutely stunning.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. And he shows it to her. And it's very inspiring because The Gathering Storm is based on those years between World War I and World War II and the lead up to it when he bought Chartwell. And he takes Clementine, his wife, out there and he reflects when he's out of power and how important it is for England to stand up as Hitler is rising and as there is a lot of nationalism occurring in Germany. Nonetheless, we have a clip on this, and this should be inspirational to you because if you can't go outside, you're afraid to go outside, and you're afraid to look at the beauty of spring, which is happening right now, but we're afraid to go out because we don't know all the facts about this virus. This should tell you that there's a gathering storm now in the world, and I hope that hopefully this clip will inspire you, and here is the clip.
Not because the house is beautiful, but because of that. What you can see from the house. England. Look at it, Clemmy. Nowhere in the world could you find a landscape more ravishing than that. And it's ours to look at and to cherish for the rest of our lives. I would die for it, Clemmy.
And that's it. Would millennials die for their country knowing that there's a rising storm and the United States is at a de facto Cold War status? Thoughts on that? My millennial Garrick, what do you think?
I mean, think about it. I mean, for the last 300 years, the United States has effectively always answered the call. You know, they've beat the drum to basically ensure that we would have the bastion of freedom in the world, and I don't think anything will ever change where we would be willing to give up those freedoms willingly. I mean, like the saying goes, you'll have to pry it out of my cold dead hands.
Of course. And look, this is, your generation is going to be dealing with this for years to come unless we solve this problem with China. Because when you have a communist government, they don't care when people die. They don't care when there's a pandemic because they really don't pay a price.
Right.
Communists don't. They're not going to be unelected because they weren't elected to begin with.
I think history is also cyclical, though. I mean, I think we're going to, as my generation, we're going to have to deal with a lot of the same things, but in a different context that like your generation did. I mean, you grew up during the heart of the Cold War, and
yep.
You know, 1983 was probably the scariest year to you, similar to how this year is already off to a pretty tragic start. And so it's always going to happen, and there's always going to be these events. We just have to always be on guard. We have to be ready to
The difference is this is not just an event. This is an epic event.
Yeah.
Because this has never happened. A pandemic has never happened.
Not like this. No.
Like this
No.
in my lifetime. And certainly, obviously, it hasn't happened in yours either.
Right.
Or our assistant producer, Chris Hopkins. No, it hasn't happened in his lifetime. And the difference is it's easily something that could happen again and again and again when you have a bad actor like China with 1.35 billion people run by a communist government that doesn't care about human life.
Yeah.
So that said, we have something really funny to come up with because hopefully the Winston Churchill movie, A Gathering Storm, inspired you. But we hope to now make you laugh.
Oh, we always like to bring some comedy to the table.
Absolutely, because next up we have the dumbest bill in America. And we have a lead up. We have a lead up for the dumbest bill in America, and it's different.
It's new.
It's new. And there's a reason it's new. Tell me, podcast listeners, if you recognize this and you're going to see a connection between this lead up and what the dumbest bill in America is. And here is the clip.
And that's how the Book of Mormon was written. Dum, 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 dum. Dum 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 dum.
So I believe that's from South Park.
Oh yeah, greatest show on Comedy Central.
The ultimate millennial show. You guys literally grew up with that.
Oh yeah.
So I got to give kudos to my son for finding that clip. Because I said, I remember watching that program, that particular one, but can you find the clip? Of course, he found it in like 2 minutes. So the dumbest bill in America is legalizing polygamy in Utah. Let me say that again. Legalizing polygamy in Utah.
And for anybody who doesn't know what polygamy is, or polygamy, which are two kind of things, they're the same thing. It's basically you can just have a bunch of spouses.
Yes.
Not just 1, 2, 3, 4, however many you want.
It seems to be men who...
With a lot of wives.
With a lot of wives, yes.
You rarely see the shoe on the other foot.
Yes, very rarely. And the legalizing polygamy is in Utah, and this bill has passed both chambers, and the governor has not yet signed it. He hasn't said whether he's going to sign it or not sign it. I don't know. But it doesn't matter because it's passed both chambers.
Yes, it is interesting because they for a while didn't know if it would go through because there was a lot of controversy, Republican and Democrat alike. Now, Utah is a very Republican state, but it's also a very Mormon state.
Yes, it is.
Brigham Young, brought his congregation and settled Utah, and for a long time, it was one of the last states to join the contiguous U.S. because of the contention between Christianity, specifically Protestantism and Catholicism, and Mormonism. And it's centered specifically around polygamy. And here we are, 2020, debating the same topic.
So the bill would here's what the bill does. It would make polygamy among consenting adults an infraction, which is an offense less than many traffic tickets. Under current law, such polygamy is a felony punishable up to 5 years in prison. But this bill, if the governor signs it, because it's now passed both houses in Utah, would basically make it like a traffic ticket, as long as the people are consenting.
You could almost call it a polygamy tax.
That's right.
You just pay a fee every year and you're good to go.
That's right. So in conjunction with crimes such as fraud, abuse, domestic violence, and human smuggling, those would all remain a felony, punishable by up to 15 years in prison. The House in Utah, the lower body, obviously, amended SB 102, which is the bill, this week to clarify that sexual battery in a polygamous household is still punishable by 15 years in prison. So the House amended the bill, but otherwise, as long as none of those things were going on, then it would be like a traffic ticket because you'd have consenting adults and everybody would agree and no one would complain, presumably. So that's what the bill does. The amendment on the House side is why the Senate had to vote again, which they did, and they passed it. So we have a couple of clips on this. So Senator Don Ipsen is one of the co-sponsors in Utah. And so here's a brief clip on what he has to say about it. Here it is.
It decriminalizes the activity and tries to give them the opportunity to bring their lifestyle and their culture and what they believe in out in the open, and they won't have to hide.
So there you go. So they don't have to hide anymore. So that's why we're doing this bill, according to State Senator Don Ipsen. And then State Senator Deirdre Henderson is a lady. She's the chief sponsor. I know this is hard to believe. So a woman is the chief sponsor of this bill. And we have two clips on her, just real quick clips. and she is speaking about this bill. And here's the first clip.
The wall Utah has built to keep people out of polygamy is the very wall that's keeping them trapped inside.
What? The wall that's keeping them out is the wall that's keeping them in? What?
I don't even know what that means.
Does that mean tear down this wall? Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall so more women can come in. I don't know.
I don't know what that means. It's a little above me. I'm not really sure.
So she's the chief sponsor. We have another clip from Senator Deirdre Henderson, the chief sponsor, and here is this clip.
We cannot get where we need to go under the current law. All of the bad things that are happening now are happening under the current law, and we need to do something different.
So she's saying already bad stuff is happening, and at least if we bring sunlight onto these communities and say it's just a ticket, as long as it's that we would write to you, as long as the adults are consenting and no one's being abused or being human trafficked and so forth, then everything's fine.
So I'm assuming her argument is that if the act itself is legal and it's all the other bad things that are illegal, that people are more willing to come forward to kind of talk about the bad things going on. I'm assuming that's the logic she's
That's the logic, correct.
Using. Okay. I don't necessarily hate that logic. I just I just don't know about the act we're talking about in the first place. So,
Makes any
so
sense.
for all, like putting it all out there, I am a Baptist. I'm a practicing Protestant. Now we're talking about things like religious freedom and the ability to practice your religion, and I think one of the central concepts, which is why we're talking about this and why I found this bill particularly interesting, is, what really is acceptable religious practice? I know Mormonism is a recognized religion, but as a society, are we comfortable with polygamy being an essential part of a religion that we all have to respect and allow to happen?
It's obviously quite cultural.
Yes.
And it's systemic in the state of Utah because
Yes.
there are some 30 or 40,000 individuals who are polygamists or
Yes.
practicing polygamy. And what I think is interesting too is the fact that so many of these individuals, here's what, okay, so let's talk this through. So let's just say a guy has 3 wives.
Yes.
And he has children from each of those 3 wives. Who's your mom? I think you know who your dad is, but who's your mom? Do you have 3 moms?
Yeah, how does the relationship work? Like, does each parent get their own kid, and it's like 3 separate families in one family?
How's that fair to the children? It's not.
I don't know.
It's not. And the thing is if you grow up on a compound like that, and let's just say, you have boys and you have girls, obviously, that are born on the compound and they grow up. Aren't you going to run out of women if you're teaching the young boys, oh yeah, it's okay to have 5 wives?
I do believe incest is a problem.
It's gotta be.
And it's not like it's advertent, like blatant, I like my sister kind of stuff. I believe, from my understanding, it's that the family lines have gotten kind of convoluted to the point that people have lost track of who's really related to who.
Yes.
And so it'll be like an inadvertent marrying my second cousin.
Exactly. And by the way, I just want to say, these are Republicans that have passed this bill out of the lower house
We
and
don't
the upper house.
discriminate down here, Mark.
And
We
that's the
don't.
great thing about this podcast. Mark and the Millennials, while we are conservative, there's no doubt about it, we're going to criticize Republicans who are idiots, and we're going to criticize Democrats who are idiots. And here's an example of Republicans who have advance this bill to the governor's office so that he can either sign it or not sign it. I don't know. But
put him in a really weird position to deal with this.
Because there go his national ambitions.
Oh, gone in a second.
Did you sign that
Aren't
bill?
Aren't you the polygamist governor?
That's right, the Me Too movement, yeah? Aren't you the guy that said it was okay for multiple women to marry one guy?
Oh, God.
So there's a coalition in Utah called the Sound Choice Coalition. And it's a group that is anti-polygamy. And as you would imagine, it's mostly made up of women, and understandably.
Yeah.
And actually, they've done a pretty good job making their case. We have a clip from them, and this particular clip, they're discussing, in part, why they are opposed to this bill. And here is the clip.
The biggest one, I would say, is the harms to young boys and men who are kicked out. There's not enough women. There's intermarriages. There's a lot of incest going on because there's not enough converts. A majority of them are on welfare, taking huge amount of money that they aren't able to support. Women are assigned marriages. Women are
all marriages.
coerced
We
into
talked about it
staying
last
in that.
night. All of the marriages are approved. Mm-hmm. All of them. It doesn't even
approved
right?
by who?
Approved by
Depends,
someone.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It might be a leader. Well, whether you get to marry or not, or whether you're signed or not, or so forth. There's just so much suppression in everything we've looked at, and people need to understand really what's behind the closed doors.
And that really is the issue, because if you are born into that kind of society, if you will, you didn't get to choose that. And you have, 3 to 5 moms and then one dad, and then one day you become a teenager and your whole outlook of society is warped. I think, because you think, well, it's okay, but then one day, let's say you decide you want to go to college and you leave that compound and you go to a school and you're like, well, what's wrong with me having 3 wives? And then
or you kind of get, or you get stuck in some of these, not stuck, but you go to some of these Mormon colleges like Brigham Young, and it's a very repressed school. They're always preaching a lot of these sentiments in class, and it's a dry campus, heaven forbid.
But look, premarital sex is practicing that in a campus is very different.
Oh, I just mean
from
even not
having
even that
5
aside,
wives.
but drinking. But it's they preach these things in class, and you have to live this godly Mormonic life. And
yes.
If you don't, it's a sin, and they'll kick you out of school. And I think it kind of pigeonholes these kids where they can't exercise a free thought about how to approach religion.
They have to be deprogrammed. I think they have to be deprogrammed to grow up in a polygamous society.
I'm a Baptist, but I was allowed to discover this on my own. My parents did a good job of putting me in a number of different Catholic educations where I was able to explore a lot of different teachings and pick one that I liked. And I think when you get put into a lot of these religious, very, very fundamental, and I'm struggling to find some of the words for this kind of a religion, but when you get put into
a cult,
I didn't want to go that far, but it's pretty close. You get stuck there, and it's unfortunate.
Because look, here's the thing: because you said you have strong libertarian leanings, and I'll leave it with this. Okay, fine. You have strong libertarian leanings, and you decide you want 3 wives, and you have 3 women who are consenting to that, but you're clearly going to have children.
Yeah.
And that's when it all gets messed up.
I might be
that's where it all goes down.
But I don't know that I'm that socially libertarian. I mean, that's a stretch.
And these are the Republicans that did this. The dumbest bill in America. Legalizing polygamy in Utah. Well, that's it. For Mark and the Millennials, this is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our millennial, Garrick Ross. And, of course, thank you to our producer, Adam Katora, and our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.